say thank you, first of all, to everybody who wished me a happy birthday for yesterday, because yesterday is my real birthday rather than my unofficial one that sometimes appears on X, which is erroneous. So August the 12th is actually the date that I was born. Now that makes me, let's think about this, that makes me 64. So officially, had the British government not gerrymandered it out of existence, I would have been actually retiring next year on my next birthday. Unfortunately, I now know that I have 3 more years of work to endure before I'm going to be allowed anywhere near my tiny little British pension. Luckily, I do have a private pension, which, although it's not huge, is certainly going to help when I add it onto the measly uh, subsistence type of pension that the British state provides for me. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today is not just about independence. It's about the relationship between the two countries, Scotland and England. Now, if we ask the question, why is it that the English state is so hell-bent on keeping us forcibly inside this union, most of us already know the answer, that England has a shortage of some things. It has a terrible shortage of renewable energy. Um, it has no current foreseeable end to its struggles to try to keep up with the demand for the energy which its country is consuming. And if you add to that the increasing population burden which is happening in England but not in Scotland, then it adds to their woes. It means they're going to have to produce more and more electricity somehow. And right at the moment, they're doing that by siphoning off green electricity from Scotland's burgeoning offshore wind farms and eventually its tidal energy farms as well. So at the moment, we're having this energy removed without our consent, without our permission, and nobody is paying Scotland for the privilege. Now, because of the neoliberal mindset of British politicians over the last 20, 30 years, maybe longer, we're stuck with a system where all of these energy companies, which are either drilling for oil and gas or producing renewable energy off our shores, are all private companies, and they are beholden to no government at all. So the British government is having to buy its energy at full market prices from these companies, which are, some of them, nominally headquartered here in the United Kingdom, as it currently is. What I want to do with this programme is to suggest some ways in which not only will we convince our own population that independence and developing a new relationship with England is necessary, but also is actually going to be better than what we have now. And we need, I think, to some degree, to try to show our English friends and neighbours over the border that actually not being physically linked to Scotland in a political union might actually be very advantageous to them. Because not only would they have a good neighbour, they would have good friends, they would also have partners in all kinds of activities, including the energy sector, including defence, including food production, drink production, and foreign earnings, and a good trade surplus with other countries. So we are exporting more than we import. All of these things are important. There's also a reason to support the convergence of currencies. Now, obviously, we're all using the British pound sterling at the moment, and even if we did develop our own currency, the Scottish pound, it's far more likely to be pegged to the value of the pound, or at least a close approximation to it, for a number of very good economic reasons, which is that it makes it easier to trade between the two countries if their currencies are approximately the same value. It means that a free trade agreement could be struck straight away, and it would also mean the rest of the world trading with the newly independent Scotland would have no trouble with the conversion rates, and that would open the door to more free trade agreements with others. So there are a lot of advantages to this. But what are the advantages to the English side? Well, let me just say one thing first of all. In order for this to work at all, in other words, to get our English neighbours to agree that separating ourselves politically is going to be to their advantage, we need to do some trading. And one thing that Scotland has, and England has as well, are commodities that they can trade in the energy markets with each other. Now, this is contingent, unfortunately, on the independent Scottish Government, whatever form that takes, of forming a new energy agency. And that energy agency would own and would buy back, if necessary, all domestic consumption, production of energy, including gas, petroleum products, and renewable energy. So all three streams would be effectively nationalised for internal consumption. Now, the Scottish Government did this, formed this agency, took back control from the various energy corporations of certain aspects of generation capacity, gas production, and so on, so that that is supplied to the population of Scotland at a cost that everybody can easily afford, instead of the vast, enormous prices that we pay in the open market. That would be a starting point. We would also encourage the English government to do the same, to form their own energy corporation, which would do precisely the same thing, partially privatise their energy market so that their domestic production is protected from high prices first and foremost. That can be done in a trade-off with the energy corporations, who would then be given the right, if you like, that all non-domestic energy that they produce can be sold at whatever price they want to whatever other countries will take it, without the British state, or what's left of the British state, or the newly established Scottish state, re-established Scottish state, charging any kind of taxation on it. Now, bartering with this type of consumable energy product is the best way, actually, of doing a good deal, because it doesn't involve money. It involves something which we have a surplus of, which England needs, and, believe it or not, a surplus which England has, which we need. And that, interestingly, is gas, because the English sector of the North Sea has far more gas in it, and gas wells and gas rigs, than it has oil rigs. The Scottish sector of the North Sea has far more oil drilling platforms and fewer gas drilling platforms. And so there is a trade to be done there between Scottish oil and English gas, and that can be done between the two national agencies. They can agree to swap. We're not buying and selling, we're just swapping these two different commodities at approximately the same value for each other. So both countries still get the energy they need in the form that they want, but neither country is disadvantaged economically by doing this. And that would establish a very comfortable trading position for all of the British Isles. All of our energy needs would be met, everybody would be able to afford their bills, and I include companies and corporations in that. And because of that, the costs of production for everything that we make here in Scotland and anything that's made in England would drop. And that is going to make their export orders far more healthy, because everything becomes more affordable. So hopefully you're with me so far. Now, as well as separating out and bartering with these energy sources, which are abundant in Scotland, we have a huge surplus of renewable energy, which needs to go to some customer. Why not barter it with England, so that we can get some of their gas for our heating, and they get some of our electricity to supply their homes and businesses? Either way, neither of us pays for it. It seems to make sense. Now, there'll be a limit to how much of this can be done, and there may need to be some actual trading where we buy and sell small proportions of each other's domestic production in order to balance up our own grids and our own networks for gas. That is all fine. Most people I know have picked out one of the problems with this, which is the fact that the last refinery in Scotland has now been shut by Ineos. Now, Ineos is an Anglo something company. I can't remember what the other, I think it's Netherlands, Anglo-Netherlands company, run by a guy called Jim Ratcliffe. Now, Jim Ratcliffe has absolutely no qualms about closing anything down and opening anything anywhere else. It's business to him. It sees no boundaries, and he doesn't care about the social effects of doing this. But it would be important for Scotland to retain a new refinery. But I would propose a new refinery with a far broader range of potential products coming out of it. So, as well as refining our own crude oil, it would also be good if that refinery had the capability to reduce things like plastic waste back into gas, or even back into oil. or even just reprocessing the plastic into something, some raw material that can be used again as a recyclable plastic. Now, at the present time, very little of this happens. Only about 13% of all plastic waste across the planet is ever recycled. The rest of it ends up in the ocean by wind, by tide, by rivers. And it's causing problems everywhere because it grinds down into microplastics, which then end up inside the very animals which we fish for, which we then eat. And some of these very, very tiny microplastics actually end up in your bloodstream. None of this is good for us. Nobody knows the long-term effects. So having an industry based on eating that horrible stuff that gets blown into the sea and turning it into something useful would be a very productive thing to do. And that is something, a technology that we could help our partners in England to develop as well, to deal with their own waste flows, so that the two countries have a way of disposing properly of plastic waste at the end of its usable life. But that would need to be linked to the eradication of single-use plastic wrapping, because that is the problem I see with everything at the moment, is the disposability of cheap plastic films which are used for wrapping food. They're not really necessary if the food production is quick enough and the logistics and the refrigeration are up to it. There is no real need to package food and transport it in plastic wrappers. It can be done far more easily without the wrapping. So there's a link there. Now, the other big industry which Scotland possesses, which England has very little of, is of course whisky production. The distilling of whisky in Scotland is a national industry, as is the distillation of other spirits such as gin, possibly vodka, and other spirits which are distilled very much in the same kind of way. And we have a huge number of distilleries, hundreds of them in fact, of all different sizes. And the whisky industry could also be partly nationalised. The domestic consumption side of it could be bought back from the distillers or groups of distillers and produced for only domestic production here in Scotland, with a very much less harmful tax on that spirit. And that can be chosen by both Scotland and England to suit their various needs for alcohol consumption or lack of consumption, and the amount of tax they want to put onto, say, a litre of spirits. So there are ways to do that as well. There are obviously lots of other things that Scotland makes which it exports, including some very high-level foods such as Scottish beef, Scottish lamb. I refuse to use the word Scotch because I find that really insulting. I think it's time we change the name of things like Scottish whisky to Scottish whisky, and Scottish meats to Scottish meats, or Scots meats at the very least. Scotch is something that's a word I detest. It's an English bastardisation of the word Scots, which is really unnecessary in the modern age. So all of these things can be done. These are going to make the economics of Scotland and England being separate countries seem much more appealing to both England and Scotland at the same time. Now, the other problem obviously is defence, because with two separate countries sharing an island, they need to have a common defence posture. At the moment, almost all of the British defence posture is located in Scotland in terms of its nuclear arsenal. Now, unfortunately for us, as well as having a nuclear submarine base at Faslane, we also have a nuclear weapons storage facility at Coolport, which is a massive underground labyrinth containing somewhere in the region of 240 individual nuclear warheads, with 10 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb in each one. And remember, there are usually 3 of these warheads in every missile which goes onto a British submarine. So it's a pretty potent mix, and each one of these individual warheads is individually targeted at a certain city, usually in Russia, but in other places too. So what should we do about it? Well, I think the most obvious thing to do about it, once we have separated our economies and separated politically, is to decide how much of this intrusion we are going to allow England to retain. I would suggest that we would insist that in exchange for having a base in our law, 2 things should happen. First thing is that none of the nuclear arsenal should be stored at Coolport. It should be stored at Aldermaston, where the nuclear warheads are built, where they have ample facilities for them, with a shorter distance to their own coastal ports to transport the warheads for rearming their submarines. So I would propose that we do not allow the rearming of nuclear missiles to happen in Scottish ports at all, of any kind. That's the first thing. The second thing is a huge moratorium, a clampdown on the nuclear pollution which has been steadily flowing out of reactor cooling systems on British nuclear submarines and into our lochs, with nothing done in terms of punishment. There's no resulting punishment or anything. They don't have to pay any kind of fine if they pollute our environment. But they are dumping high concentrations of highly radioactive tritium into the seawater in our lochs. That has to stop. So what would we permit? We would permit the UK to still operate a replenishment base for its North Atlantic fleet of nuclear deterrent submarines. Now I would suggest, and I know people say to me, I'm completely against nuclear weapons, completely against them. The English state is going to want to retain them for their own protection. We don't have to store them though, and in fact I take issue with the idea of storing nuclear weapons anywhere in Scotland. However, the siting of a replenishment port at Faslane is slightly better, because they would be taking on food, water and other consumables, but not weaponry. And that, I think, could be supported by our base, although it would be compromise. The rest of Scotland's defence, I think, needs to be aimed at protecting itself from threats from the sea, because we're basically surrounded by sea on three sides. We have thousands of kilometres of inlets, sea lochs, coastlines. None of it's really adequately protected from the sea or from the air. So a good system of air defences would be necessary to shoot down any aerial threats, such as cruise missiles, ballistic missiles being launched from elsewhere, and possibly having a good set of subsea, probably sonar systems, looking for activity below the waterline, anywhere off our shore out to 200 miles. The idea basically would be to make sure that we see any potential submerged threats before they get close enough to do anything to us, and also that we have perhaps our own fleet of Scottish conventional submarines, which are able to stay submerged long enough to hunt for these types of submarines from other countries and to deter them from straying close enough to do us any damage. Submarines of this kind for a Scottish naval fleet don't necessarily need to be nuclear. I have proposed in the past the idea of an electric submarine recharging facility, a subsea facility, which would have its own tidal energy array and own storage system. That would mean that the submarine could dock with this installation on the seabed, recharge its electric batteries, and then depart without ever surfacing. And having a way of doing this would be unique. It would be unique new technology that could be sold to other countries, for example England. We could show them how to set this up, and they could refuel, or rather recharge their electric submarines without them having to poke their noses above the water. All of these things can be done. None of it is science fiction. All of it just requires a little bit of adjustment of the money spent by currently the British Ministry of Defence on its submarine fleet. Scotland would need to start its own armed defence forces. There would need to be a smallish armed force on land to operate its defensive systems. That would not require a large military in terms of personnel, because we can use so many more electronic systems. I think if nothing else, the Ukrainian defense systems that have been developed during the war with Russia prove that a small country can defend itself and fend off a much larger aggressor without having to put its own people in danger. So there are elements there to be taken from Ukraine, which I think would be important, and also can be employed by the English state in its defensive posture as well. But what this takes is a government here in Scotland with imagination and with the right type of experts to show how this kind of change can be made in Scotland even before we vote for independence, to demonstrate to the rest of the UK that we can do these things, and we can do them without yet being separated from England, so that we can show them the way to do it themselves. Because once you have England and Scotland able to both defend themselves, trade effectively, not only with each other but other people, to produce and to trade enough energy for both of them to easily be comfortable through the winter months, all of these things. These need to be developed, and nobody ever talks about this. We only ever talk about the political aspects of separating from England. We need to talk about everything, and we need to show a concrete plan that all of this could be achieved. Now, I've only touched on some areas today. There are many, many others in terms of other things that Scotland produces. For example, in engineering, Scotland desperately needs its own car manufacturing industry. And I would suggest that we look at electric cars powered by hydrogen, because we can make hydrogen easily in a green way using renewable electricity, and we can store it in high pressure carbon fiber wrapped pressure vessels, which are very, very lightweight, can easily be built into cars so they can be refueled quickly. And of course, hydrogen, when it's converted into electricity, splits into, well, actually recombines with the oxygen in the atmosphere to become water vapor or steam. So these cars wouldn't emit anything really other than a little bit of water vapor. But the beauty of having hydrogen-powered electric cars is we would still have an energy system necessary to fuel those cars, and that would generate a new industry based on knowledge gained from subsea operations in the North Sea. So many things that we can do, and we could do. I've mentioned our space program a good few times. The first launch license ever for a Scottish-built rocket launching from a Scottish-based launch site has now been given by the Civil Aviation Authority, and I would expect by the end of this year Scotland will have launched its first rocket. It will not go into orbit, but it will cross the so-called Kármán line, which is the boundary between the atmosphere and the vacuum of space. And once it does that, we're officially a spacefaring nation, and we can develop our own launchers. So we have more capabilities to do more things, and that needs to develop as well. We have all these abilities. The only thing we lack is the people to make the political decisions to do this, and to form the agencies necessary to make it happen, and to fund them at least initially to get them started, so that these industries can be begun. And I am certain that there would be a queue of investors queuing up to put up money to help do this, especially if there was a good, sound economic reason for doing this that is also going to create profit further down the line for the surplus energy market later on. So there are many, many reasons why I think this should be talked about now, and this really today is my first attempt to try and explain some of it on this channel. So I hope you've enjoyed the program and managed to follow my rather scattergun approach to this for the last few minutes, and you'll join me again. Now, as you know, Inde-Car runs only on donations and only on whatever time I can give it. So if you can afford to help, please do so using the donation link to my PayPal account. I'll try and put up another link later today. But in the meantime, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and ring the notification bell that appears with these programs, so that you're warned when I go online before it happens. And that way you'll be able to keep up with my rather sporadic broadcasting timetable. Anyway, that is it from Inde-Car today. Hope you've enjoyed the program. If you have any comments, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. But as I always say, keep the faith. There is a great future ahead, both for Scotland and England, if we can convince everyone, and not just the Scots, but also our friends in England, that doing what I'm proposing would benefit both countries enormously and allow the two to become independent of each other, but with a good, friendly trading arrangement and a bartering system, so that they can exchange commodities that we have surpluses of in exchange for ones that we have deficits of. And all things being equal, they will benefit both countries. That's it from me today. I'll talk to you again soon, but keep the faith. Bye for now.